Final Fantasy series is very close to my heart. I played all of them on the PlayStation when I was a kid. Final Fantasy 7 and 8 were incredible titles. But it's only when I discovered the high fantasy, colorful characters and beautifully stylized art with Final Fantasy 9 that it struck a chord differently for me. I think this title really inspired the art that I do today. Hey guys, Florian here. It's been a while since I've done a personal artwork, being really focused on client work this past month. I wanted to show you guys a little bit of my process with this concept and imagine how I would remake a scene for the game if it were to ever be remade today, just like Final Fantasy 7 was remade beautifully recently. First of all, like many of my professional work, I like to start with a 3D blockout, since this is such a tremendous help to bypass some tedious art fundamentals like construction, perspective and lighting. Of course, it doesn't solve everything and you still have a lot of work to do, and I understand those principles, but it's just like a very advanced sketch in my mind. When I first thought about this small project, I queued up a bunch of walkthrough of the game on YouTube, but instinctively I had an idea from the get-go. You see, the introduction of Final Fantasy IX is very famous. There's a lot of drama, mysteries, and epic scenes happening. It's been praised by a lot of JRPG fans, and rightfully so. In my opinion, it's one of the best intro to a game ever made. I strongly suggest to look it up if you've never experienced it. But like in a lot of JRPG, there's a point in the game when you are finally in control of the character's destiny. And you're allowed as a player to start exploring the game freely, and I cherish those moments a lot. In Final Fantasy IX, it happens for the first time after the intro, when the Prima Vista Theater flying ship gets bombed by the Queen, and the whole cast of characters come down crashing in the evil forest. Like in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, I really wanted to allow myself to be creative with the scene. Still pay an homage to the original material, but be free with camera angle, lighting and overall shape language. The scene depicts the ship crashed in the middle of the forest with one of the cast members, Sina, going around fixing things, helping people and being a handyman overall, trying to manage the aftermath of the event. The player, incarnating Zidane, is free to get in and out of the ship to talk to other characters, find treasures, or go on an adventure in the evil forest to rescue his newly made friends. Even though Sina is not a very important character, he's here for the player to sell them a couple of items, give them advice and suggestions on where to go, and go out the ship. After trying to find high resolution of the background and the ship, I kind of forfeited and decided to make my own reinterpretation of some of the designs. Within Maya, I can make a very quick blockout to resolve some important issues like the composition, manage the focal length of the camera and overall mood of the place. An important change that I did that might bother some of you purists out there is the change in the lighting. The original evil forest is very dark and the scene not very bright at all. However, I like the idea of creating a feeling of a camp of fortune right in front of the wrecked ship. And that's why I wanted to add the campfire, to contrast with the mysterious, menacing forest around the character, bringing a feel of comfort in the scene. Anyway, after modeling some boxes, barrels and a bunch of trees, I took care of adding a bunch of cubes in the scene to reference the height of the characters in the place. And I played a lot with the area and mesh light to create a whimsical feel in the forest. I also wanted to add a small lantern in the back to emphasize the fact that warm colors were places of rest and safety for the player, as opposed to the cool blues and greens that would suggest danger, mysteries and adventure. When I'm done with the blockouts, I can start painting fully in Photoshop. I never spend too much time on Maya or make any complex render passes. I just do one render with Arnold and start painting on top of it. Many fellow artists would think this is a crazy way of working, but for concept art and personal work, I use this method very often. Like I said previously, the 3D blockout is the equivalent of a preliminary sketch for me. I want to be able to paint on top of it without the hassle of managing layers or anything else technical. I like to start my paintover by resolving a bunch of obvious loopholes from the 3D renders, work the atmosphere a little bit, and add the first draft of potential characters. Sometimes I'll also start by focusing on a small area of the painting, even going into details, just to warm up a bit. This is kind of helpful when I'm feeling overwhelmed by a huge scenery, and I don't really know where to start. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's actually kind of weird to pay an homage to such an incredible game by showcasing a secondary character like Sina in such a picturesque scene. But I guess sometimes the simplest scenes stick with you very clearly, just as much as the epic battles and grand moments. I also like to draw directly on top of the 3D. For example, sketching up the trees in the back. I really wanted to suggest that the ship had broken a bunch of them when crashing in the forest. At some point also I was wondering what the hell were these round shapes supposed to be on the ship. I blocked out spheres in Maya at first because I was too lazy to understand what it was, but at some point I had to figure it out. After some research and discussions with my friends, we determined from this 200 by 200 pixel piece of art that those were actually projectors. And it seemed pretty fitting with the theme of a theater ship. So I went back to Maya in order to model those and re-render my scene fairly quickly. This would save me the hassle of managing those ellipses in perspective and render them quite easily. At this point I also wanted to light them up, because why not, right? Even though I now think they may be a little bit too distracting in the image, bringing too many warm colors. Anyway, my painting techniques for this kind of piece is quite straightforward. I only use layers vaguely to detach some elements or add some effects. I'm more thinking like a traditional painter. I like to be able to manage colors, values and light and shadows at the same time. I try to steer away from complex layer styles and work 90% on normal mode layers. My brush set is also not very extensive. I use only around 20 brushes that are manageable and suit my needs of diversified edges and graphic intentions. If you're interested in seeing more about the tools that I use, check out the description below. I like to take extra care of the shapes and edges in the painting more than the overall rendering quality. Since I'm so impatient anyway, I don't like to take the time to detail too much, basically. I also refrain a lot from zooming in, so my graphic intentions stay consistent. If you have the habit of zooming in too much on your paintings, stop doing that and try to work from afar. About the color palette. This was determined very early on during the blockout from the original source material with a base of greenish blue. The yellows of the campfire make an obvious complementary contrast. I then enriched the palette throughout the overall process by stepping away from these two opposite colors on the chromatic circles and finding some of their neighbors to bring in the painting. This way I can keep a strong contrast but also add more subtlety and nuances in the scene. This image was actually quite a challenge for me, to be honest. The setup is very unusual, and with the camera angle focusing on the campfire, leaving the crashed gigantic ship in the background as secondary point of interest was quite tricky. I think even as a finished piece right now, it's still really difficult to understand what's going on in the background. However, since I'm treating this image for a hypothetical remake of the game, I really don't mind. In the game you would have lived the scene prior to the impact and seen the cinematic of the crash, so it would make sense in the context. You could also see in the process that I tried adding more characters to the scene, but in the end I thought it was too distracting and creating too many focus points in the image. That's why even though the Mog is supposed to be present in the scene, I left it out of this piece. As you can see, I make a lot of changes even very late in the process. For example, I struggled quite a bit with the trees in the scene. You can see me going back and forth with their shapes, and I did a lot of iteration to find a solution that satisfied me. They are a very important part of this environment, and I was looking for the correct shapes for them. Menacing but at the same time kind of bulky and round. Since the game has such a cute design language overall, I didn't want the forest to feel overwhelmingly terrifying with small pointy shapes. That's why I went back a lot on them. In the finished painting, you can see the tree closer to the barrel and other boxes ended up not being cut out, because I wanted to push out the background out of the image a little bit. So I decided to close the composition even more with the tree. The first interesting scene that I wanted the viewer to look at was the campfire with Sina sitting in front of it. Same goes with the foreground elements. At first I wanted to light them up, but in the end it didn't work really well, that's why I tuned them down. I've always worked like this since I'm always trying to look for the best solution for my painting. I really dislike working on an image when something is bothering me and I'm not allowed to change it because it was set up like this in the initial sketch. Final Fantasy IX is one of my favorite JRPG of all time, and I know many fans are out there. I'm amazed by the work done by the team working on Moguri mode that basically enhanced every background of the game to an incredibly high definition with the help of deep learning techniques. If you are ever to experience the game for the first time or do another playthrough, I really suggest that you give this mod a try, it's truly amazing. Anyway, after some more rendering and more last-minute changes, I bring the painting to a finished state. I really hope you appreciated this process video and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Have a great day.